What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today, as you can tell by the title, we are back with another updated hero guide, this time focusing on one of my favourite characters in Count Dooku. A few months back I did do a poll to see if you guys wanted to see all of the hero guides get updated, which as you can see by the result was a pretty resounding yes, and the last time I did a guide for Dooku was actually way back when he was first added to the game, so I have been wanting to update this one for quite a while now. Now, you can see on screen what we're going to be going through in this video. We will of course start off with his base stats, then go through and break down all of his abilities, and then I will touch on both some tips for Galactic Assault and the hero game modes, covering both the star cards as well as just some general gameplay tips as well. So if that is what you guys are looking for in a hero guide, then make sure to drop a like on the video, and let's see if we can't get to 2,000 likes. Now, keep in mind that almost everything in this guide was tested in arcade, and while I'm 99% sure that all of these stats do transfer over to multiplayer, just bear in mind that there is always a chance that some stats may actually change from arcade to multiplayer. So if you see any stats that don't seem right, then that is most likely what's happened. So getting stuck into it, first off we're going to take a look at his base HP, and he does have the average health pool for a saber user coming in at the stock standard 750 HP. On top of that, he does also have 250 health regen as well, which again is pretty much the average for the saber users. So you can go from 750 HP all the way down to 500 and still be able to regen all the way back to full health. Now, his weapon of choice is of course his custom curved lightsaber, which is probably one of my favourite sabers in Star Wars, and with Dooku being one of the best duelists in Star Wars as well, this one does deal some very serious damage. It deals 130 damage per hit from the front and 160 damage per hit from behind, which is about the average for a saber user or just above the average. However, when you factor in all these other stats, that's where he starts to become even more deadly. He has a swing speed of 2 swings per second, which is up there with some of the best in the game, and you can actually increase this with his duelist ability, which I will touch on in just a minute. Despite his other stats being great, his lunge distance is really not great at all. It almost feels kind of bugged if I'm going to be honest, as you can often be about a meter away and it just won't lock on and give you that slight lunge effect. However, usually his first swing at least has a pretty decent lunge. As for his stamina pool, I have classed it as high, as he can swing about 14 times before running out of stamina, which is beaten only by Obi-Wan, and his blocking stamina is pretty decent as well. Now, moving on to his abilities, and he does have a pretty solid set of abilities, all of which are more on the deadly side rather than being passive, and especially when you use them all in tandem, they do combine together very well. His L1 ability is called Lightning Stun, which has a 15-second cooldown, and exactly as it sounds, this will cause Dooku to use his Force Lightning to damage and knock down anyone within the area of effect. It deals 160 damage to a single enemy, and then with each enemy that it hits, it'll deal 10 damage less, so you can hit 2 regular troopers and kill them in one shot, but once you do hit 3 enemies at once, it'll only deal 140 damage each. This ability is really solid when it comes to just having a one-hit kill ability. It's really good for just quickly taking out an enemy in a tough situation, and on top of that, it is also really great for knocking down enemy heroes as well. Its only real downside is that it does have a very small area of effect, so you do need to always make sure you're close enough before you try and use it. Moving on to his L1 R1 ability, this one is called Duelist, and it has a very nice 12-second cooldown. This ability causes Dooku to play a little bit more aggressively, dealing 155 damage from the front rather than 130, and dealing a massive 210 damage from behind rather than 160. And on top of that, it also increases his swing speed from 2 to 2.4 swings per second, which really increases his damage output over the course of just a few seconds. This ability is specifically really good for taking out heroes if you find yourself in a battle, and it also allows for a one-hit kill on all classes other than the heavy, which is definitely very handy as well. Its only real weakness is that it does have somewhat of a slow animation to activate it, and so just be careful and try and activate it before heading into a fight rather than in the middle of one. Moving on now to the R1 ability, this one is called Expose Weakness, and it has a 16-second cooldown. This ability allows you to target one enemy, causing them to move slower and take more damage by about 20% more, and if you kill that enemy while they're targeted, it will actually completely reset the cooldown as well, meaning that you can essentially use it again straight away. This ability is again really good to use against a hero if you need to either catch up to them or even to try and fall back and regen some health, and it's also really great for slowing down runners who are trying to escape. Its only real weakness is that again it does have a relatively slow animation, and because you can only use it when you're close to an enemy, it can sometimes leave you pretty open to an attack. So that is it for all of his base stats and abilities. Now we're going to move on to some of the more important stuff, starting with his best star cards for Galactic Assault. Now obviously it does really come down to personal preference, so these definitely aren't the only cards that you can use, but these are just the cards that I think are the most important and most well suited cards for Galactic Assault. So the first card I'm going to recommend is his Sith Control card, and this one just gives Dooku up to 120 extra health regeneration, meaning all up he'll be able to regenerate 370 HP, which is essentially half of his health pool. This one does kind of speak for itself. More health regen is going to help you stay alive much longer, so this is definitely a card that you want to use. The next card I'd recommend is actually his stamina card called Finesse, which you'd think he wouldn't really need because his stamina is already pretty decent, but this actually just allows him to block for a crazy amount of time. And I've also found that if you use this card and find yourself in a battle with an enemy hero, you're almost never going to lose, as that added stamina combined with Duelist is just essentially unbeatable in a 1v1, and it does also dominate against crowds of enemies as well. As for the third card, I'd recommend using the Balanced Duelist card, as this one just reduces the recharge time of his Duelist ability, meaning it can have an 8-second cooldown, which for what the ability does is absolutely insane. Now, the last card I'm going to mention is probably to replace that stamina card if you don't feel like you want to use that one, and this is the Masterful Duelist card. This one just increases the damage of his Duelist strikes by up to 20 damage when fully maxed. Now, for the longest time I was actually using this instead of the stamina card, but when I actually did the math, this card really only helps to save a saber swing against enforcers, as anyone else like troopers or even heroes, it'll still take the same amount of swings to kill the enemy, so it's a good card, but I do prefer using the stamina card instead. Now, like I said, these are just the main cards that I'd personally recommend using. However, if you do disagree, then definitely feel free to let us all know down in the comments section, as there really is no right or wrong when it comes to something like choosing star cards. So now moving on to some of the best maps to choose Dooku on when you're playing Galactic Assault, and the top 3 that I've picked are Naboo, Kashyyyk and Yavin 4. All of these maps do provide a lot of cover via buildings or trees, and they do allow you to flank your enemies a whole lot easier in my opinion than a lot of the other maps in the game, so you can often get behind the enemies and use that duelist ability to really quickly take out whole squads at a time. Now obviously this doesn't mean that these are the only 3 maps you should choose him on. He's honestly great on, I would say, literally every single map in the game, but these ones are probably just a good starting place if you're not too sure what to choose him on. Now, as for some tips for Galactic Assault, and like I touched on a little bit earlier, Dooku's lunge distance can sometimes be a bit of an issue, and so that is the first thing I wanted to touch on, as it is probably one of the main reasons I find myself dying. Like I said, a lot of the time it just feels like you're about a meter away from your enemy and he just won't lock on to get that slight lunge towards his enemy, and essentially he'll just stand there swinging his saber without really moving forward. If you're the type of player who spams that swing button around enemies, which we all do from time to time, then this can be a bit of an issue, because essentially you'll just be standing in almost the exact same spot without moving, swinging that saber and wasting your stamina while probably taking a little bit of damage from your enemy, since you're not really a hard target to hit. The best way to sort of counter this is really just to make sure you're always close to your enemies before swinging, rather than allowing for that lunge like we do with most characters, where you kind of just swing from a meter or 2 away, knowing that you will be dragged towards the enemy. You should also try your hardest not to spam your attacks, and let's be honest, we're all guilty of spamming that swing button when there are enemies nearby, but with Dooku it's best to try and just get out of that habit if you can, because like I said, it can be pretty deadly if you do it around a few enemies who know what they're doing. Now, I did touch on this a little bit earlier as well, but another good tip is to try and flank your enemies as much as you possibly can, because with Dooku's swing speed and just overall damage output, if you can get behind a whole squad of 4, oftentimes you can just take all 4 out within a few swings, which is done much easier than it is with most other characters. Another reason for why he's really good when you flank a lot is because he is a tad slower than most of the other heroes, and so that combined with his lack of a decent lunge, he can sometimes struggle to close ground on his enemies when you take them head on. If you are trying to take on an enemy from the front and you need to close them ground, the best tip I can give is just to make the most of those 3 dodges that he has, and if you do a kind of zigzag pattern forward, your enemies are going to struggle to hit you, and therefore you will be able to close ground on them a little bit easier. Dooku can definitely be a little bit tricky to get the hang of, but like I said earlier, just try and combine your abilities, focus on map situation and try and flank as much as possible, and it will definitely go a long way towards improving your Dooku gameplay overall. So that is going to be it for the Galactic Assault tips. Now we're going to move on to some tips for the hero vs villain game mode. So starting off with the best star cards, and I think Dooku is actually the only character that I do this with, but I actually just use the exact same cards between all the different game modes. I'll quickly show them all on screen again, but just to save some time I won't cover them all again, as we have already been through what they do and why I think they're useful. So now moving on to some tips for the hero game modes, and to be honest, a lot of it can be transferred straight from the GA tips, so I won't cover too much, but I will just touch on what I mentioned. Like I said earlier, Dooku is probably one of the best, if not the best duelist in the game, and so you shouldn't have too much trouble winning your battles, but I will just give a few quick tips on how to make sure you are winning those matchups. Firstly, Dooku will melt literally any of the blaster heroes in the game if you just use your duelist and make sure to block once they do start shooting at you. Essentially, you just want to block their shots and deflect the damage onto them, and then once they stop shooting, you just want to deal as much damage as you can with duelist or just your regular attacks. And then if they do start rolling around, just make sure to stop swinging and wait until they have finished the roll before swinging again. As for Saber heroes, you want to try and make sure you're combining your attacks with all three of those dodges, as you can use that extra dodge to get behind your enemy and avoid their block, which is pretty much how you're going to win most of your Saber battles. On top of that, anytime you see them drop their guard, you should try and hit them with the lightning stun, because if you do knock them down, then you can get in some very quick damage while they're unable to block. And with Dooku, once you've gotten your enemy to half health while yours is still full, they're really not going to have a very good chance with your high health regen and high damage output. Now, as for some characters to look out for, and honestly, Han and Lando are really the only two that I think pose any kind of threat to Dooku, and that is being very generous, because like I said, if you play your cards right, blaster heroes are no issue at all when you're playing as Dooku. The reason I did decide to keep these two on the list is because Han does have a really high damage output with his detonite, the shoulder charge going through blocks, plus that rapid fire ability as well, so if you do slip up against a good Han player, they will make you pay for it more often than not. As for Lando, his stun is obviously an issue, and his smoke grenade does also actually stop your saber from locking on when you're in that smoke, so that makes your saber lunge even worse, which again can be a bit of an issue if you don't play it smart. Just make sure to keep an eye on these two, and if you do play it smart and don't get too aggressive, then they shouldn't be too much of an issue at all. But anyway guys, that is going to be it for our Count Dooku hero guide. Hopefully some of these tips did help you guys out, and if they did, then make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any more Battlefront 2 videos or live streams. Feel free to comment down below which character you would like to see get updated next, and I will do my best to get onto it as fast as possible. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.